All right, thanks everyone. Thanks, Gene. We just want to make this, as informative as possible after the introductions. So I think it helps to sort of understand where we are, sort of where we've been, and potentially where we're going with as far as Social Security goes. I saw some people, reading ahead earlier in the slides, so you get, we're not going to dwell on all the details, but just wanted to introduce you to sort of exactly what it is we're talking about when it comes to talking about Social Security. At the outset, I'll just say that, so Social Security, we're going to focus on retirement benefits. There's technically also a disability aspect to Social Security. That's sort of beyond the scope here. Suffice to say, sort of the credits you earn for retirement can also be used if you become disabled before retirement. That's totally, really separate aspect of Social Security, but it's also part of the program. And we're also not going to touch on, so Medicare is also closely related to sort of Social Security and these sorts of retirement issues. We're not going to touch on that as well. That's sort of a whole another separate set of issues. So we're going to focus on Social Security retirement benefits, and really, we'll get into details, but they consist of sort of retirement benefits for the worker, retirement benefits for a spouse, and sometimes even dependents, depending on the situation. So basically, Social Security Act 1935, first benefits were paid in 1940, and sort of a potential long-term theme is that at that point, retirement age was 65, and average life expectancy in the United States was 62 for males and 67 for females. So that's where we started. If you're curious, today's U.S. life expectancy is 83 for men and 85 for women. So this is not really a policy. We're not going to talk about policy, but that sort of leads to a lot of things that we'll maybe talk about towards the end. Back in the 50s, this is an important aspect of Social Security, is that they provide annual cost of living adjustments. So most annuities, most traditional pensions or whatever, they don't provide cost of living adjustments. That's an important feature of Social Security. It's tied to the Consumer Price Index. And also one thing that generated this topic is it was most recently changed in 2005 through something called the Bipartisan Budget Act, which is kind of hard to believe happened, but essentially closed two things called deemed filing and file and suspend, which is basically sort of, I guess we've called them loopholes, but essentially aspects that are no longer available for planning techniques. So for some families, it's sort of a less generous. It's also a little, simpler to understand what goes into your decisions to file. Broadly speaking, Social Security works by taxing sort of your earnings while you're working. Your earned income up to $127,000 in 2017 is taxed at 12.4%. So those of us who are working, you see your pay stub, says FICA or Social Security or whatever. The employee pays 6.2%, and technically the employer contributes 6.2%. And some folks who are self-employed may notice that they're on the hook for the full 12.4%. And that's for Social Security. There's an additional Medicare tax that's also part of the FICA system. So we use generally 1.45% for Medicare on top of that. Some sort of tax nerd points of this is that there's for workers who earn less than $40,000 a year, they almost universally pay no income tax to the federal, but they do pay Social Security and FICA tax. And so they did in 2006, there was 80 million sort of taxpayers paid no income tax. Those 80 million taxpayers paid $121 billion of FICA tax. So employers and employees contribute into the system. It's a tax that's a payroll tax, so it's separate generally from it's technically separate from the income tax. If you're self-employed, you sort of pay it with your income tax. But that's sort of the high picture how it works. You earn credits each year you work, and technically you get 40 quarters sort of earnings entitles you to Social Security benefits when you become retirement eligible. What that means, essentially, you earn 4 quarters a year, and basically you just need to earn $1,300 to earn a quarter in 1 year. The other important part for Social Security is your earnings have to come from what's considered covered employment Now, these days, it's basically every type of employment except for generally if you work for a state that has opted out of Social Security. And in California, that's basically CalSTRS. So CalSTRS does not contribute to Social Security. Therefore, when you're in the CalSTRS system, you're not earning credits. And that can affect, if you come in and out of a non-covered employment, that can affect your earnings and how they're calculated. And also, if you're married to someone who's not in the Social Security system, can affect. Yes? Yeah, exactly. So it's all state teachers. So largest state teachers. Technically there's some CalPERS employees, so state employees. It depends really on, whether they've been carved out based off whether their job title is. And they're contributing to a totally separate system. They're contributing more, but they're contributing to a state system, so they don't pay Social Security. Therefore, they're not earning credits into Social Security. We talked about full retirement age, very important concept. This is your sort of, what the government has decided is your retirement age where you can get unreduced benefits. And the other caveat with full retirement age is once you hit full retirement age, you can continue working and receive your unreduced benefits. After all of this, it's basically based off your highest 35 years of earnings up to 127. Sort of when you're earning more than that, you're not earning more credits. You're just maxing out your credits for that year. And they index them back to your last 35 years to come up with whatever your monthly wages are, and that comes up with this sort of alphabet soup thing of primary insurance amount. So all of your benefits are based off of your primary insurance amount and when you collect your benefits as it relates to full retirement age. And a lot of this stuff is simplified. You can go online, SSA.gov, put in your Social Security number and your information, and they track your earnings history, and they'll project out your benefits. And they also send you a sort of, I don't know if you guys have seen this 4-page form that comes in the mail. I guess it's technically 3 months before you turn 60, and then other years after that if you haven't applied. That'll tell you, this is your earnings history. This is your projected benefit at 62, 66, 70. So they send you that thing, and you can also look it up sort of online to really sort of simplify what it is that where you actually stand at that point. So that's sort of how you earn benefits. This is sort of basically how you collect the benefits. So this is sort of just laying the groundwork for sort of things that we talk about. Essentially, with retirement benefits, we're talking about you, the worker. You can collect as early as 62, even if your full retirement age is 66, but you get a reduced benefit. We'll talk much more about that in a second. In addition to retirement benefits, is what we're talking about with the worker's spouse gets a benefit, and the worker gets a spousal benefit even if they haven't paid into their system on their own record. So that's something for especially important planning for married couples. There's, in addition, it's not on the slide, but in addition to a spousal benefit, there's also the survivor benefit, which is available for a surviving spouse. And what that really is just the continuation of the higher earner spouse's retirement benefits. So if you have a married couple, one with a high earning history, one with a lower earning history, when one of those folks passes away, the survivor gets the bigger of the two benefits, but the other benefit goes away. While they're both alive, they get a retirement benefit and a spousal benefit. And very simply, the spousal benefit, if they don't qualify on their own working record, is half of the worker's primary insurance amount. So basically, it's a simple scenario. There's a working spouse whose benefit's $2,000 a month. There's a non-working spouse or a spouse that didn't earn enough credits or whatever. They would be entitled to at least $1,000 a month. And it doesn't detract from the earner's spouse's benefit. The other caveat with spousal benefit is there's also benefits for divorced spouses. The biggest note for divorced spouses is you have to have been married for 10 years. So if you're married to someone for 10 years and you get divorced and they still have, essentially half of their benefit is higher than your benefit, you'll get half of their benefit even though you could have been divorced for 20, 30 years at that point. Yes?
So
So yeah, so that.
Everybody heard that question?
Yeah, so she's asking if you have two spouses with their own records, can you defer one and take the other and get the spousal benefit? That used to be yes, and now it's only if you're, I think, 63 or older can you defer your own benefit while allowing it to accrue. So that's sort of one of the complicating things that they took away with the 2015 changes. One caveat is you can actually, so there's divorced, there's married, and then there's widow is a separate filing status. With widow, you basically get the spousal or the retirement benefit of your former spouse. So you don't get the half, you get the full as a widow, and you can actually collect as early as 60. So that's just another caveat for widows, and as opposed to widows, divorcees, and married are basically the three filing status with Social Security. Another interesting thing of Social Security, and it may or may not, become more popular, I don't know, but dependents, if you have a dependent that's under age 18 and you're eligible for retirement benefits, when you apply for retirement benefits, they basically ask who you're married to and who are your dependents, and if you have any, if you had, in this scenario, you reach full retirement, you could be as young as a 44-year-old parent, become retirement eligible at 62, take Social Security, and your kids will get half of your benefit until they're 18. Now that's subject to this family maximum. Essentially, they don't let current families get more than 180% of the worker spouse. So if there's a working spouse and 4 or 5 kids, they limit each person's benefit to whatever the maximum is. And an important caveat here is divorced or ex-spouses, it doesn't count in that number. So divorced spouses' benefits don't have any effect on the retiree spouse or their current spouse or anybody in their family. So a lot of different people can collect the worker, their spouse, assuming they don't have their own benefit, especially when the spouse is going to be collecting Social Security, they figure out they get the higher of their own benefit or half of the spouse's benefit. So if they do have their own benefit, basically, they don't technically get a spousal benefit, they just take their own benefit.
So Ryan, can I ask a question? So sure. I don't know if you have experience in this area, so it can get a little confusing just to listen to that.
Yeah.
If you went to the Social Security office and asked these questions, what kind of response do you get?
Yeah, so surprisingly, people have pretty positive experiences with Social. I mean, generally you can do most of the stuff online. I mean, I would only do that if it's a pretty simple scenario. If you have any questions, you can either call up. You can always call Social Security. There's generally a bit of a hold time to speak to someone, but those people are generally very knowledgeable. They got all the resources in there, and a lot of the complications with Social Security have to do with your own family's specific scenario. So it gets unwieldy to talk about all 100,000 different scenarios, but if you call up, say, this is my particular issue, there's generally 3 or 4 decisions you have to make about a particular strategy. And in addition, so you can do online, basically you can do it all online if it's simple, right? Or you can do it online even if it's complicated, but I would recommend not doing it if it's any bit complicated. You can call up with just general questions. You can call up with specific, I want to file for Social Security questions. Or what people have found is, successful sort of just scheduling an appointment at a Social Security office. You go in there, you can bring all of the materials that you would need to file for it, and the people have positive experiences. I've had people say, I didn't realize I could get my former spouse's Social Security. They're not trying to, not have you, get what's yours under the rules, but they go and basically say, your Social Security, your spouse, your former spouse information, all that stuff. So generally positive experiences when it comes to actually sitting down and applying, and
Is it retroactive?
That's a good question. So so once you're full retirement age, actually this is actually what we're talking about right now. So when can I collect? You can collect as early as 62 or as late as 70. And to determine, well, if I'm 62, why don't I just collect at 62? They reduce your benefit by 25% as opposed to what you would get if you waited to 66. Once you're 66, you would get what you're considered your primary insurance amount. And if you were to apply, they would actually ask you, do you want, if you wait, so technically this is on a monthly schedule, so if you turn 66 and you apply when you're 66 in 6 months, they'll ask you, do you want the last 6 months? They'll go up to 6 months and back. So but that's only applicable when you're full retirement age or above. So basically when you go if you're 66 and a half, they'll say, do you want your primary insurance amount or do you want that plus 4% roughly? They give you a lump sum for the 6 months that you didn't apply for, but you get the lower monthly benefit.
Let's assume wife does not have a W-2 job. Husband supports a family. Wife is 65. Qualifies for Social Security or deferred.
So
What would you recommend?
So the caveat with that scenario is that the spouse.
Did everybody get that scenario?
So we have a working spouse and a non-working spouse. The non-working spouse is 65, so the problem is not yet full retirement age. So spouse would have to wait for the working spouse to apply. That's the other big change in 2015 is the working spouse has to apply and receive their benefit.
So the non-working spouse cannot apply after.
That's correct. So we'll talk about that. Yeah. So it used to be, sort of talking about sort of how the things used to work is that you could quote file and suspend your benefit, which would allow anyone else that could collect, like a spouse, to collect their benefit. Now, to sort of encourage people to, to take an earlier benefit, arguably, I don't know, I'm not assigning any motive to why they changed the rules, but that, the non-working spouse can't collect until the working spouse applies, when they're married. Doesn't apply to divorce.
If you apply for deferred benefit, do both spouses have to wait?
Yes. That's the fundamental change of that second thing called the file and suspend method is you can't defer the benefit and have someone else collect a benefit off of that amount.
Even if you're over 63.
Yes. Yes. So even if you're over 63, because that's what's called file and suspend, sort of the collecting a spousal benefit but allowing yours to increase is called deemed application. So anyway, this is sort of the biggest decision for a lot of retirees, and it depends largely on your own lifestyle, your own sort of resources, and sort of your own working goals in these ages. So technically, you can get your Social Security benefits as early as 62, and you can delay it till as late as 70. They give you 8% more of a benefit each year, and this may make sense. I got some numbers on the next slide to show you what that looks like. Or you can get it earlier and take less of a benefit. A caveat, so you would never delay more than 70. You don't get any credit for going past 70. And this is one of the things where Social Security isn't also going to call you up when you're 71 and say, hey, you forgot to apply for Social Security. So that's certainly something to be aware of. You can't go past 70. And there's no benefit for the spouse deferring the spousal benefit past their full retirement age. So those are sort of two hard and fast rules, probably the only, among the few hard and fast rules when it comes to Social Security is you don't wait past 70, and your spouse, if they're just going to claim a spousal benefit, provided you've applied, doesn't wait past their full retirement age. Their full retirement age. So, if they're in your scenario when the spouse gets to 66, assuming that's their full retirement age, and they're going to get a spousal benefit, assuming the other spouse is filed, they don't get a credit for deferring. This is another scenario. Social Security isn't going to, let you know that your spouse has gone past and she doesn't have a bigger benefit waiting for her on her own. So, and this chart just shows you. So now those are sort of the things to think about for yourself. This is sort of hopefully to help you think about, well, what is out there? Like, what have I earned? And what can I expect in retirement depending on sort of different ages? So what we have at the top is basically sort of an inflation adjusted. What were our average earnings throughout the year? So if you were a super high earner for 35 years, you maxed out your Social Security, you're in this column. If you averaged $50,000 a year in earnings over the last 35 years, you're in the other column. And then sort of 66, this is our full retirement age target, and basically sort of shows you the difference between waiting to collect. Instead of getting $2,600 a month for the rest of your life, if you wait the 4 years, you get this 8% per year. You'd be collecting $3,500 a month for the rest of your life, as opposed to starting at 62, collecting $2,000 for the rest of your life. Yes.
Ryan, collection of benefits, is it only while living in the U.S. or can you live abroad anywhere?
You can live abroad, so as long as you can earn the credits in the U.S. And there's a lot of complicated international tax treaties out there that you could, earn technically Social Security not in the U.S. But if you earn it, you can collect, wherever you end up retiring. This is a super caveat, but there's like a couple countries where they don't, eventually with banking sort of regulations, they don't allow Social Security to send funds to, certain countries. But yes, you can retire anywhere else, and you've earned the benefits, and they'll pay them to you. Couldn't come to a CPA firm and tax planning firm without talking about tax for at least, this is just one slide, I promise. When you do collect your benefits, they're taxable on a sliding scale based off of the rest of your income. So if you're married and your income on the year is less than $32,000, then your Social Security benefits are not taxable. And I should just add, this is sort of what counts as income. Basically, interest, dividends, capital gains, plus muni interest, and then they add in half of the Social Security benefit to figure out if you're over that threshold. Probably more information than you need. So if your income's less than 32, it's not taxable. And then we'll skip down to here. If your income is more than $44,000, then your benefits are what's called 85% taxable. Not taxable 85%. 85% of the amount you receive is taxable, on your tax return. So wherever your marginal rate ends up, they had 85% of the benefit you received. The one thing, though, it's not subject to most state taxes, including California, so you get to back that out. One of the few things California does not tax Social Security.
Right now.
Yeah. Another, just a technical aspect, when you go to apply for Social Security, they're going to say, well, do you want tax taken out? And you're like, well, I don't know. So anyway, that's something you want to talk about with your advisor. They'll give you the option to have no tax withheld, 7%, 10%, 20, and up to 25% withheld on your benefits if you're worried about it becoming taxable and owing tax and penalties and whatnot at the end of the year. So they do give you the option of withholding tax from your benefits. We've touched on a couple of these complicated issues. The first one to definitely be aware of is what's considered the retirement earnings test. And this is in the situation where you're still working, but you heard that you can collect Social Security at 62. So you're like, well, let's go collect Social Security. You don't actually want to do that because if you're younger than full retirement age and you're still earning income, and it does not have to be a ton of income, as you see here, $17,000, they actually withhold the benefits. So you don't get to keep working yet under full retirement age and collect Social Security. What they do is they accrue the unpaid benefits, and they'll pay it back to you when you become full retirement age. But you're forever locked into the younger, amount you started collecting. So if you're working, generally not a good idea to let's also collect Social Security. Happens sometimes where we start collecting Social Security and we start working again. Not the end of the world. Obviously, consider that when you're thinking about how if you have any flexibility of how much to earn. But those are just something to be aware of as far as overall strategy, retirement earnings test. The restricted application that we talked about, that's saying I'm going to only apply for my spousal benefit and allow my benefit to keep growing. Now, this was sort of grandfathered in for the folks who are 63 now. You can still do that when you reach full retirement age. But for folks who are younger than that, this strategy went away. And then the one that was the biggest benefit really to, basically sort of well-to-do, folks that didn't need their Social Security to live on, had, a working maybe two working spouses, a working spouse and a half. they're called file and suspend. So now, once you reach full retirement age, you have to receive your benefits to allow other people to collect yours. So what would happen? A working spouse, or let's say two working spouses, they would collect their spousal benefit and allow theirs to keep going. So they collect $1,000 a month, and then they let their benefit keep going, and then they end up collecting $2,100 a month. So they can't do that anymore. That was the biggest change in that, really sort of from a practical dollars and cents standpoint, the biggest change of the 2015 law. So you cannot, you can no longer file and suspend your benefit. Two final sort of complicated scenarios that will come up from time to time is, in both scenarios, basically sort of involves non-covered employment, so the CalSTRS or the public employee situation. Basically, windfall elimination basically says when they say how much you're projected to earn, if you during the time when you were contributing, basically what happens is you contribute to Social Security, then you don't for a period of years, and then you do or whatever. So you have your 40 quarters of coverage, but you also contribute to a state pension in the meantime. The way that they calculate the benefits is, this is technical, but lower earners, it looks like they have a lower average monthly earnings, so they're going to have a lot of 0 years in that scenario. They basically reduce the amount you would receive under sort of the traditional payment schedule because it looks like you earned less than you really did because you've also accrued this private pension, or public pension, I should say. And then government pension offset is, this is in a scenario where the spouse has a public pension that did not contribute to Social Security. Basically, they reduce the amount of pension that they would get of Social Security because they didn't contribute it, and they have their own pension. This is sort of a hot button topic legislatively for Congress, men and women in states with large public pensions, like California. So just to, it comes up from time to time. I was in Massachusetts. Massachusetts teachers don't contribute to Social Security. California teachers don't. So they should just be aware that when they get their own sort of public pension, they are not also going to get a full spousal benefit when the spouse passes away. So the GPO is only, government pension offset is only for, once somebody has passed away. All right, so some sort of common misunderstandings. Obviously the number one is Social Security is going bankrupt. There's not going to be any money available, and I'm just going to be out of luck. Not completely incorrect, but just some sort of context. So how Social Security works is, in 2016 there was $678 billion that went into Social Security, and at the same time $768 billion came out. But they have what's called the reserve fund. So right now there's $2.8 trillion in a reserve fund that's completely separate from the rest of the federal government. It's in the old age and security trust fund. And when people say, so the year you hear right now is in 2032, or actually 2034, Social Security is going to be, quote, insolvent. What that means is that's the year under current projections that the reserve fund is going to be depleted. But they're projecting that 75% of the benefits that are scheduled to be paid in that year are going to be paid in by current workers, because as the system works is, while you're working, you contribute to the system, and at the exact same time retirees are taking money out of the system, and you don't have like an individual account with your name on it. It's just sort of going into this one big pool and going out to current beneficiaries. So the fact that they're under current law and current actuarial projections, in 2034 there'll be 75% of what they need coming in each year, and it's really just one big math problem what Congress is in charge of this decides to do to change that, if they decide to change that. Second myth, I should always claim benefits as early as I can. We'll talk a bit about break-even ages as sort of a gross collection strategy. We talked about the earnings test, so just because you're entitled at 62 if you're still working, doesn't make sense to claim because they'll withhold your benefits. And the final myth is, well, if they're going to give me 8% per year to defer to 70, that's always the best strategy. Again, this is sort of you got to consider your lifestyle, your resources, your life expectancy, things like that go into a collection strategy for a family. This is sort of just a gross collection benefit strategy, like how many dollars would I get depending on when I collect. This is all assuming sort of full retirement age. So essentially, if your benefit is $2,687 a month, say I'm not working, and I want to collect at 62, so I go along, I collect at 62, I have dollars in my pocket now, I'm collecting them now. However, by waiting to full retirement age, once you're age 77, you would have collected more dollars than having collected at 62. And then further, if you have waited till age 70, by the time you're age 82, you would have collected more dollars from Social Security as compared to the two other strategies. Now, I'll say this is sort of just a gross dollars out of the system calculation. It ignores your personal situation, whether or not you're spending versus savings the money. I mean, for a lot of our clients, we run a scenario, say, what's our projected tax bracket? Am I going to be saving? Am I going to be investing these dollars or spending these dollars? And the numbers can look different depending on whatever your strategy is. But this is sort of a gross dollars out. And then the next two, where it gets a little more complicated, are spousal situations. As we mentioned, sort of a lot more complicated when there's two benefits to consider. And this is just a full, everyone's situation is going to differ. You're going to have to consider all the rules and the collection rules for each person, how much each person has earned, how old they are, what's their life expectancy, below average, above average. So this is just sort of an example. We got two earners. This was a lot more exciting when you can do file and suspend and deferred applications and stuff like that. But basically, if you're assuming we're 78, so remember, average life expectancy, 83 for a man, 83 for a man, 85 for a woman at this point. So once you're 78, full retirement age with two workers, and then at 82, having waited to 70, best benefit for under a gross collection strategy. The other thing to think about is they've obviously, as life expectancy has kept increasing, once you're 65, your life expectancy is longer than the average, right? You've made it to 65, your life expectancy actually becomes, I think it's 87 for a man and 93 for 90 whatever. There's a 50% chance that a married couple that both makes it to 65, statistically speaking, makes it to 92, I think. So longevity is really changing a lot of the calculation when it comes to what's the right strategy. And unfortunately, it comes with sort of morbid thoughts like, well, what's my life expectancy? I mean, and then one more that just shows you sort of the difference when there's this is the scenario where we have a full working spouse and basically a non-working spouse. At this point, because there's not an other benefit and we can't file and suspend and we can't sort of get an earlier benefit for the other one. Basically sort of at 77 full retirement age, and since there's since we can't defer a spousal benefit while we're or we can't get a spousal benefit while we're deferring to 70, it kicks the break-even age out to 88 in this scenario. So this is a scenario that has really changed the most with the recent laws. And then our strategy at GM Wade, it just sort of build it all together to come up with whatever our old long-term retirement projection looks like. Figure out how much we're expecting of Social Security. What are we expecting for? What do we need for spending? What are we thinking about asset allocation-wise to say, what strategy makes the most sense? It's a huge flexibility between whether or not you need to spend the money, whether or not you're still working, or whether or not you have the flexibility to invest it in addition to, to supplement your other lifestyle. I will say one of the biggest things I guess would apply across the board is if you delay Social Security because you think you're getting more benefit in out years, but you're drawing from retirement accounts to make that up, that's a really hard thing to overcome because you're taking dollars out of a tax deferred account. I would say that's sort of something you really need to take a hard look at to say, at the end of the day, what's my asset level look like? What's my flexibility look like? Versus taking a little bit less now, keeping sort of to defer the tax, the IRAs and the 401ks, because once you're taking the tax off the top of the distributions, sort of it makes the numbers not as plausible. All right. Any questions?
Only a few thousand.
Yes, Dana.